If your mind feels like a restless river tonight, flowing with thoughts of what you lack, what went wrong, or what might have been, this is a space where you can finally rest. Perhaps you arrived here carrying the weight of unmet expectations, disappointments that cling to your shoulders, or simply the exhaustion of constantly wanting more than this moment offers. Take a deep breath now. Let your jaw unclench. Feel your shoulders drop away from your ears. You are exactly where you need to be. If you find comfort in this space and wish to return here for rest and renewal, I invite you to subscribe to our community of seekers. Let us know in the comments where you are listening from tonight, so we can hold you in our collective awareness as you journey toward peace. In a monastery nestled between ancient mountains, where morning mist gathered like prayers between the peaks, there lived a monk named Takuan who could not sleep. Night after night, he lay upon his simple mat, his mind churning with thoughts of everything he did not have. While his brothers slept peacefully around him, Takuan catalogued his deficiencies. He was not as wise as Brother Kenji, who could quote sutras from memory. He was not as disciplined as Brother Hiro, who never missed a single morning meditation. He was not as beloved as Brother Sato, whose gentle humor brought smiles to everyone he encountered. Takuan's mind was a merchant of lack, constantly taking inventory of insufficiency. The Zen master of the monastery, an elderly woman named Eshun, noticed that Takuan moved through his days with shoulders bent, as though carrying invisible burdens. His eyes rarely lifted to meet the sky. His footsteps made no sound, as if he wished to disappear entirely. One autumn evening, as the monks gathered fallen leaves in the courtyard, Eshun approached Takuan and asked him to walk with her. They moved in silence through the monastery gardens, where chrysanthemums bloomed in defiance of the cooling air. Finally, Eshun stopped beside a small pond where koi fish swam in lazy circles. She picked up a stone from the path and held it out to Takuan. "Tell me," she said, "what do you see?" Takuan examined the stone carefully. It was grey and ordinary, the kind of rock one might skip across water or discard without a second thought. "Master, I see a simple stone. Nothing special." Eshun nodded slowly. "And what does this stone lack?" The question puzzled Takuan. "Master, it lacks many things. It is not precious like jade. It has no sparkle like crystal. It is not smooth like river stones shaped by water. It is not large enough to build with or small enough to fit in a pocket without notice. It is simply insufficient." The master's eyes crinkled with something that might have been amusement or compassion. "Now tell me, young Takuan, does this stone know what it lacks?" Takuan opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. He looked at the stone in Eshun's weathered palm. "No, master, the stone does not know. And because it does not know what it lacks," Eshun continued, "does it suffer?" "No, master." "Then who creates the suffering of insufficiency? The stone, or the one who judges it?" Takuan felt something shift in his chest, a small crack in the armor of his discontent. But old patterns die hard, and his mind quickly found new ground for argument. "But master, surely we should strive to improve ourselves. Is not the spiritual path about becoming better than we are?" Eshun tossed the stone into the pond. It disappeared beneath the surface with a soft splash, sending ripples outward in perfect concentric circles. "Watch the water," she instructed. "Does it try to become better? Does it criticize itself for being disturbed? No. It simply returns to its nature. The ripples settle. The surface becomes still again. This is not improvement. This is return." She turned to face Takuan fully. "You spend your days comparing yourself to others, measuring yourself against an imaginary standard of perfection. But tell me, when you compare yourself to Brother Kenji's wisdom, do you become wiser? When you measure yourself against Brother Hiro's discipline, does your own practice deepen? When you judge yourself lacking beside Brother Sato's warmth, does your heart grow more compassionate?" Takuan had to admit the truth. "No, master. I only become more miserable. Exactly. Comparison is not the path to growth. It is the path to suffering. You cannot water a seed by constantly digging it up to check its roots. Aishun gestured toward the monastery grounds around them. Look at this garden. The maple tree does not wish to be a pine. The chrysanthemum does not mourn that it is not a rose. Each plant grows according to its nature, receiving the rain, accepting the sun, taking what nourishment the earth provides, and in this acceptance, they flourish. As darkness gathered around them, Aishun asked Takuan to try something. Tonight, before you sleep, I want you to find 3 things for which you are grateful. Not grand things, not accomplishments or possessions. Simple things. The breath in your lungs, the mat beneath you, the roof above your head. Can you do this? Takuan agreed, though he felt uncertain about this practice. It seemed too simple to address the gnawing emptiness he felt. That night, lying on his mat while his brother's breathing deepened into sleep, Takuan tried to follow Aishun's instruction, but his mind resisted. It wanted to return to its familiar patterns of comparison and self-criticism. Finding gratitude felt like trying to write on water. Still, he persisted. He brought his attention to his breath. In, out, in, out. Yes, he could be grateful for breath. Without it, nothing else would matter. He felt the firmness of the mat beneath him, supporting his tired body. How many nights had he lain here, never once acknowledging this simple gift? The mat held him without judgment, without asking anything in return. He could be grateful for this. He heard the rain beginning to fall on the roof above, a gentle percussion that turned the world soft and intimate. The roof kept him dry. The walls kept him warm. He had shelter. Yes, he could be grateful for this too. Something unexpected happened as Takuan acknowledged these 3 simple things. His breath deepened. His body relaxed. The endless churning of his mind slowed, just a little. He did not fall asleep immediately, but the quality of his wakefulness changed. Instead of lying there, cataloguing his inadequacies, he simply listened to the rain. When morning came, Aishun asked him how the practice went. Takuan admitted it had been difficult, that his mind kept wanting to return to old patterns. But Master, I did find 3 things, and for a moment, just a moment, the heaviness lifted. Aishun smiled. A moment is enough. We do not learn to walk by taking a single perfect step. We learn by taking one imperfect step, then another, then another. Tonight, find 3 more things. They can be different things, or they can be the same 3. The specific content matters less than the practice of looking. So began Takuan's education in gratitude. Each night, before sleep, he would find 3 things to acknowledge with thanks. Some nights it felt mechanical, a duty performed without genuine feeling. Other nights, something would catch in his chest, a sudden awareness of grace he had overlooked his entire life. The way morning light fell across the meditation hall, the taste of simple rice, the sound of his brother's laughter during their evening meal. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift in Takuan's inner landscape. The constant noise of comparison grew quieter. Not silent. Old habits have deep roots, but quieter. He began to notice things he had overlooked before. The first snow of winter. The careful way Brother Hero arranged flowers for the altar. The patience in Master Aishun's voice when teaching the youngest monks. One day, several months into this practice, Takuan was washing dishes after the morning meal. It was a chore he had always disliked, viewing it as menial work that took him away from more important spiritual practices. But on this particular morning, his hands in the warm water, feeling the smooth curve of the bowls, something extraordinary happened. He felt grateful, not because the water was warm or the bowls were clean, but simply because he was alive to perform this ordinary task. His hands worked. His eyes could see the soap bubbles catching light. His mind, for this one moment, was not at war with reality. The feeling was so overwhelming that tears began to slide down his cheeks, mixing with the dishwater. Brother Sato, working beside him, noticed and asked with concern if something was wrong. Takuan could only shake his head, unable to explain that nothing was wrong. For the first time in years, everything was inexplicably right. That evening, he sought out Master Aishin. "Master, something happened today while I was washing dishes. I felt grateful, but not for any specific thing. It was as if gratitude itself was washing through me, for no reason at all." Aishin nodded, as if this was exactly what she had been waiting to hear. "You have discovered something important. Most people think gratitude is a response to receiving good things. They believe it is a transaction. Something nice happens. Therefore I feel grateful. But true gratitude is not a response. It is a way of seeing. It is the ability to recognize the extraordinary nature of existence itself." She poured tea for both of them, the liquid flowing in a perfect arc from pot to cup. "When you first came to me, you saw everything through the lens of lack. Your mind had trained itself to notice what was missing, what was insufficient, what could be better. This is a kind of blindness. Not because those observations were untrue. Certainly you are not as learned as Brother Kenji, not as disciplined as Brother Hiro, but because that way of seeing obscured everything else." Takuan sipped his tea, feeling its warmth spread through his chest. "So the practice of finding 3 things each night was training my mind to see differently." Exactly. You cannot force gratitude. You cannot command yourself to feel thankful. But you can train your attention. Where you place your attention is where your life goes. If you place your attention on lack, your life becomes an experience of poverty, no matter how much you have. If you place your attention on sufficiency, on the gifts already present, your life becomes an experience of abundance, even if you own very little. Master Eshin set down her teacup and looked directly at Takuan. "Tell me, in these months of practice, have your circumstances changed? Are you suddenly wiser than Brother Kenji, more disciplined than Brother Hiro, more beloved than Brother Sato?" Takuan thought carefully before answering. "No, Master, I am the same person with the same qualities and limitations. But somehow I am different. The weight I was carrying has lightened. Not because my burdens were removed, but because I stopped picking them up each morning." "Yes," Eshin said softly. "You are beginning to understand. Most of our suffering is optional. We create it by arguing with reality, by insisting that this moment should be different than it is. Gratitude is the end of that argument. It is the acceptance of what is, combined with the recognition that what is enough." As the seasons turned and winter deepened, Takuan's practice evolved. He began to find gratitude not only for pleasant things, but also for difficulties. When he woke with a headache, he felt grateful for the teaching about impermanence. This too would pass. When he struggled with a particularly challenging meditation, he felt grateful for the opportunity to observe his own resistance. When conflict arose between monks, as it inevitably did in any community, he felt grateful for the chance to practice patience and compassion. This confused some of his fellow monks. Brother Kenji asked him one day, "How can you be grateful for problems? Should we not seek to eliminate suffering?" Takuan considered this question carefully. "I think there is a difference between seeking to eliminate suffering and being at war with difficulty. When I resist a problem, I suffer twice, once from the problem itself, and again from my resistance to it. But when I can find even a small seed of gratitude within the difficulty, something shifts. The problem does not disappear, but I am not destroyed by it." He paused, then continued. "Master Aishin taught me that gratitude is not about pretending everything is wonderful when it is not. It is about training the mind to see the whole picture, not just the parts that cause pain. Even in the midst of difficulty, there is always something to acknowledge. The difficulty itself is often the greatest teacher." One harsh winter night, a fire broke out in the storage building where the monastery kept much of its food for the cold months. By the time the monks managed to extinguish the flames, half their winter provisions were destroyed. The community faced the very real possibility of hunger in the months ahead. As they stood in the cold, surveying the damage, many monks were dismayed. Some were angry. Others were frightened about what this meant for their survival. Master Eshen called the community together in the main hall. Her face was grave but calm. "We have lost much tonight," she said. "But before we discuss what we will do, I want us to spend a few minutes in silence, finding 3 things for which we can be grateful, even in this moment of loss." Some monks looked at her as if she had lost her mind. How could they be grateful when they faced potential starvation? But they trusted their teacher, so they closed their eyes and turned their attention inward. The hall was silent, except for the sound of breathing and the occasional crackle from the hearth. After several minutes, Eshen invited anyone who wished to share their gratitude to speak. At first, no one moved. Then Brother Hero stood. "I am grateful that the fire did not spread to the living quarters. We could have lost lives tonight, but we lost only food." Brother Sato stood next. "I am grateful for the neighbors who saw the flames and came to help us fight the fire. We did not face this alone." Then Takuan rose, his voice steady. "I am grateful for this opportunity to discover what we are made of. In abundance, it is easy to be spiritual. Now, we will learn who we truly are." One by one, other monks found their voices. Someone was grateful that the water barrels were full. Another was grateful for the strength of the community. A young monk was grateful that he had learned how to work hard, because that skill would be needed in the days ahead. By the time everyone who wished to speak had done so, the atmosphere in the hall had transformed. They still faced difficulty, but they faced it together, and they faced it from a place of recognition rather than despair. In the weeks that followed, the monastery community came together in ways they never had before. They reached out to neighboring villages, offering services in exchange for food. They rationed carefully, but fairly. They supported each other through moments of weakness. And through it all, the practice of gratitude continued. Each night, each monk found 3 things to acknowledge, no matter how challenging the day had been. Sometimes it was something as simple as, "I am grateful I did not give up today," or "I am grateful for the warmth of my brother's hand on my shoulder when I felt too tired to go on." By the time spring arrived and new food became available, something remarkable had happened. The monks had not only survived, but had deepened their practice and their bonds with each other in profound ways. The crisis had become a crucible for transformation. Master Eshen gathered them together again. "We began winter with full storage rooms and partially empty hearts. We end winter with empty storage rooms and fuller hearts. Which condition is poverty, and which is wealth?" Takuan understood now what she meant. True wealth was not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of wholeness. The ability to meet life as it came without constantly demanding that it be different. Gratitude had not made their problems disappear. It had made them capable of holding those problems without breaking. Years passed. Takuan grew older, his black hair gradually turning silver. His practice deepened. He became known throughout the region not as the wisest monk, or the most disciplined, or the most beloved, but as the monk who could find peace in any circumstance. People came to him with their troubles, and he would listen with great care. Then he would ask them a simple question. "Can you find 3 things to be grateful for, even in the midst of this difficulty?" Often people would resist, just as he once had. They would tell him their problems were too serious for such a simple practice. Their pain was too great. Their circumstances too dire. And Takuan would nod with understanding, for he remembered his own resistance. Then he would tell them about the night he first tried to find 3 things to be grateful for, how mechanical it felt, how his mind fought against it, but also how, over time, that simple practice had transformed his entire experience of being alive. One day, a young woman came to the monastery carrying a baby. Her husband had died suddenly, leaving her alone with no means of support. She was drowning in grief and terror about the future. "How can I be grateful?" she demanded of Takuan. "My husband is gone. My child will starve. Everything is falling apart." Takuan sat with her grief for a long time, not rushing to respond, not trying to fix anything. Finally, he said, "I will not tell you to be grateful that your husband died. Some things are simply terrible, and we must honor that truth. But tell me, in this moment, right now, is there anything at all that you can acknowledge?" The young woman's eyes filled with tears. "I can acknowledge that my baby is alive, that she is healthy, that she sleeps peacefully in my arms, even though my world has shattered." "Yes," Takuan said gently. "You can start there. Not because it makes everything okay, not because it erases your loss, but because in the middle of the storm, you need something to hold on to, some small piece of solid ground. Gratitude for what remains can be that ground." Over the following months, the young woman returned regularly to the monastery. Sometimes she came to cry, sometimes she came to sit in silence, and sometimes she came to share small discoveries. She had found work at a neighboring farm. A widow in the village had offered to watch her baby during the day. Her child had smiled for the first time. None of these things brought her husband back, but they were threads of grace woven through her grief, and learning to acknowledge them did not diminish her loss, but made it bearable. Takuan watched her slowly rebuild her life, not despite her grief, but alongside it. And he understood more deeply than ever that gratitude was not about denying pain or pretending everything was fine. It was about developing the capacity to hold both the bitter and the sweet, to acknowledge the full complexity of existence without being destroyed by it. On his 50th birthday, Takuan's fellow monks threw a small celebration. As they sat together sharing tea and simple sweets, Brother Kenji asked him, "Looking back over all these years, what do you think is the most important thing you have learned?" Takuan was quiet for a long time, watching steam rise from his teacup in delicate spirals. Finally, he spoke. "I have learned that happiness is not found by accumulating more or becoming better, or finally having everything work out perfectly. Those are mirages that recede as we approach them. True peace comes from the radical acceptance of what is already here, and gratitude is the practice of that acceptance. Every moment of my life now, I have a choice. I can focus on what is missing, or I can acknowledge what is present. That choice determines whether I experience my life as poverty or wealth." Brother Sato, his old friend, smiled. "And which do you choose now?" "Most of the time, I choose to see what is present. Not always. I am still human, still imperfect. My mind still sometimes wanders into comparison or complaint, but now I notice when this happens, and I gently guide my attention back to what is here, back to this breath, this moment, this precious, ordinary, extraordinary experience of being alive." Master Eshun, now very elderly, was also present. She reached out and took Takuan's hand in her gnarled fingers. "Do you remember the stone I showed you all those years ago?" "Yes, Master. I think of it often." "That stone is still in the pond where I threw it. It has not become jade. It has not developed a sparkle. It remains exactly what it is, resting on the bottom, doing what stones do. And yet it is perfect. It has always been perfect. You are like that stone, Takuan. You have not become someone else. You have simply stopped arguing with who you are. And in that acceptance, you have discovered your perfection." Takuan felt tears come to his eyes, not tears of sadness, but tears of recognition. "Master, I want to ask you something. That first night, when you asked me to find 3 things to be grateful for, did you know it would change everything?" Eshun's eyes sparkled with mischief. "I knew it would change something. Whether it would change everything depended on you. The practice is simple, but simplicity is not the same as easy. Many people hear this teaching and dismiss it because it seems too small to address their large problems. They want dramatic solutions, sudden enlightenment, miraculous transformations. But real transformation is not dramatic. It is the accumulation of small choices made day after day, moment after moment, until one day you wake up and realize you have become someone new by being more fully who you always were. As the evening deepened and the celebration wound down, Takwon found himself alone in the garden where his journey had begun so many years ago. He walked to the pond and looked down into the water, now dark with night. He could not see the stone at the bottom, but he knew it was there, still being itself, still perfect in its ordinariness. He thought about all the years of practice, all the mornings of finding 3 things to be grateful for, all the moments of choosing acknowledgement over complaint. Had it been worth it? The question arose and dissolved almost simultaneously, because he knew the answer in his bones. His life had not become easier. He had not become famous or accomplished great external achievements. But he had become free in a way that no external circumstance could touch. He had learned to be at home in his own existence, and that was everything. The moon rose over the mountains, casting silver light across the monastery grounds. Somewhere a nightbird called. The air smelled of pine and approaching winter. Takwon stood in the garden, his heart full of something he could not name, but could only feel. A vast, oceanic sense of being held by life itself, of belonging to something infinitely larger than his small self. This, he understood, was what gratitude had opened in him. Not happiness in the conventional sense, not the absence of difficulty or pain, but a profound sense of rightness, of being woven into the fabric of existence in a way that could never be undone. He returned to his room and lay down on his mat. The same mat he had lain on that first night when Master Eshen had given him the practice. Before closing his eyes, he brought to mind 3 things to be grateful for. His breath, still flowing. The mat beneath him, still supporting him. The roof above him, still sheltering him. The same 3 things after all these years, and yet not the same, because he was not the same person who had first acknowledged them. In finding gratitude for the most basic elements of existence, he had found a way to be at peace with life itself, in all its beauty and terror, all its gain and loss, all its presence and absence. As sleep began to find him, his last conscious thought was a simple one. I am grateful for this day, exactly as it was. And that gratitude carried him into dreams, like a boat carried on a gentle current. Held by waters that had been there all along, waiting for him to stop struggling and simply float. In a village near the sea, there lived a fisherman named Koji, who had forgotten how to be satisfied. Each day, he would go out in his boat and bring home fish to sell at the market. Some days the catch was plentiful, other days it was modest. But no matter how many fish filled his nets, Koji would return home with a frown, calculating how many more he might have caught if only the tide had been different, if only the weather had cooperated, if only the fish had been biting more eagerly. His wife, Yumi, watched him grow more sour with each passing year. You have enough, she would tell him gently. We eat well. We have a roof over our heads. Our children are healthy. Why can you not be content? But Koji could not hear her. His mind was always elsewhere, chasing an imaginary future where he would finally have enough, where satisfaction would finally arrive. He did not notice that he had stopped tasting his food, stopped hearing his children's laughter, stopped feeling his wife's hand in his as they walked along the shore. He was physically present, but spiritually absent, living in a ghost world of what might be, rather than what was. One day, after a particularly disappointing catch, Koji's boat developed a leak far from shore. He tried to bail water, but the leak was too large. His boat began to sink. Koji, who could not swim, clung to a piece of driftwood and found himself at the mercy of the waves. For hours he drifted, certain he would die. He thought of all the days he had wasted in dissatisfaction, all the moments he had failed to truly live because he was too busy wanting more. Regret filled him more thoroughly than seawater ever could. Just as his strength was failing, a larger fishing boat spotted him and pulled him from the water. The crew brought him to shore and helped him home, where Yumi wept with relief to see him alive. That night, lying beside his wife, listening to his children breathing in the next room, Koji experienced something he had not felt in years. Gratitude so intense, it was almost painful. He was alive. His family was here. He had been given another chance. In the days that followed, Koji could not return to his old ways. The experience of nearly dying had cracked something open in him. When he went out in his boat, he found himself grateful simply to be on the water, to feel the sun on his face, to see the play of light on the waves. When he returned with fish, he was grateful for whatever he had caught, whether it was much or little. Most surprisingly, he began to notice his life as if seeing it for the first time. The way his youngest daughter would run to greet him when he came home. The sound of Yumi humming as she prepared their evening meal. The taste of hot tea on a cold morning. One evening, Yumi looked at him across the dinner table and said, "You are different. What happened to you out there on the water?" Koji thought about how to explain. "I think I died and came back as myself. Or maybe I finally woke up to the life I already had. I do not know how to put it into words. But I almost lost everything, and now that I still have it, I can finally see it." "Can you stay this way?" Yumi asked. "Or will you forget again and return to the old Koji?" It was a fair question, and Koji knew it. The mind has a tendency to forget, to slip back into old patterns. Already, just days after his near-death experience, he could feel the pull of his old dissatisfaction trying to reassert itself. "I do not know," he admitted, "but I want to try to remember. I need help to remember." That night, Koji went to visit the village temple, where a nun named Jikoin lived. He told her about his experience at sea and his fear that he would forget what he had learned. "How do I hold on to this feeling of gratitude?" he asked. "How do I keep from slipping back into my old ways of always wanting more?" Jikoin listened carefully, then said, "You cannot hold on to feelings. Feelings arise and pass like weather. If you try to grasp them, they slip through your fingers like water. But you can practice a way of seeing. You can train your attention, just as you have trained your body to handle a boat and your hands to mend nets." She gave him a practice. Each morning before leaving for the sea, he was to stand at his doorway and silently acknowledge 3 things he was grateful for. Each evening when he returned, before entering his home, he was to do the same. "This is not about feeling grateful," Jikoin explained. "Some mornings you will not feel anything. You will simply be going through the motions. That is fine. You are training your mind to notice what is present rather than what is absent. Over time, this practice will change how you see." Koji began the practice with skepticism, but he kept his promise. Each morning, standing at his door before dawn, he would silently acknowledge 3 things. Sometimes it was simple. "I am grateful for the strength in my body. I am grateful for this boat. I am grateful for the ocean that feeds my family." Other times, when he felt resistant or distracted, he would struggle to find even one thing. But he kept at it, and gradually something did shift. The practice became less mechanical. His attention began to naturally notice things worth acknowledging. The way the sunrise turned the water golden, the clean smell of salt air, the satisfying ache in his muscles after a day's work. Yumi noticed the change in him, not just that he smiled more or complained less, but that he seemed fully present in a way he had not been in years. When their children spoke to him, he actually listened. When she told him about her day, his eyes stayed on her face instead of drifting away to whatever internal calculation had always occupied him. "The practice is working," she observed. "Yes," Koji agreed. "But not in the way I expected. I thought it would make me feel happy all the time. Instead, it has made me more aware of what is actually here. Sometimes what is here is difficult or painful or disappointing, but even then, there is something to acknowledge. Even the difficult days are part of a life, my life, and I am alive to experience them. That itself is a kind of gift. One day, Koji met another fisherman at the market, a man named Daichi who was known for his large catches and prosperous business. In the old days, Koji would have looked at Daichi with envy, would have gone home brooding about his own comparative lack of success. But on this day, something different happened. As Koji watched Daichi, he noticed the tension in the man's shoulders, the way his eyes never seemed satisfied, even as he counted his considerable profits. He saw in Daichi his own former self, and he felt compassion rather than envy. On impulse, Koji approached the other fisherman. "Your catch today is impressive," he said. "You must be very pleased." Daichi shrugged, his face sour. "It is adequate, but I lost one net, which will cost much to replace, and the prices are lower than last week. I should have waited to bring them to market." Koji heard the familiar voice of dissatisfaction, the endless calculus of what might have been. "Tell me, Daichi, when will it be enough? What amount must you catch? What price must you receive before you are satisfied?" The other fisherman looked startled, almost offended. "What kind of question is that? A man must always strive to do better, to earn more." "Must he?" Koji asked gently. "I used to think so too, but then I nearly drowned, and I realized I had been drowning all along, drowning in wanting more, drowning in dissatisfaction. The ocean almost took my life, but it gave me something more valuable. It taught me to see what I already have." Daichi dismissed this with a wave of his hand. "Easy words for a man with a modest catch. You speak of contentment because you have not achieved what I have." Koji smiled, not with smugness, but with genuine understanding. "Perhaps you are right, or perhaps contentment has nothing to do with the size of one's catch. I will leave you to decide." He gathered his own modest earnings and walked home, his step light despite the smaller weight of coins in his pocket. That evening, performing his gratitude practice at his doorway, Koji found himself grateful for the encounter with Daichi. It had shown him how far he had come, how different his inner landscape had become. He was grateful that he no longer measured his worth by comparison to others. He was grateful that he could see suffering in another person and feel compassion rather than competition. He was grateful to be coming home to his family, to the simple meal waiting for him, to the ordinary miracle of another day lived. Years passed in this way. Koji continued his fishing, continued his practice. His catches did not magically increase, nor did his material circumstances dramatically improve. But his experience of life transformed utterly. He became known in the village not as the most successful fisherman, but as the most peaceful one. People noticed that he moved through difficulties without becoming bitter, that he celebrated others' good fortune without resentment, that he seemed to carry an inner stillness even in the midst of life's inevitable storms. Younger fishermen sometimes sought his advice, assuming he had some secret technique for finding fish. Koji would smile and tell them, "The secret is not in the technique. The secret is in how you hold your life. Are you living it, or are you constantly wishing you were living some other life? Are you tasting your rice, or are you thinking about tomorrow's meal while today's food turns cold?" Most did not understand what he meant. They would nod politely and go back to their boats, back to their striving. But occasionally one would hear something in his words that resonated. One young man named Taro began joining Koji on his morning trips, learning not just how to fish, but how to be present while fishing. "Why do you pause before getting in the boat?" Taro asked one morning, noticing Koji's habit of standing still at the shore. "I am acknowledging 3 things I am grateful for," Koji explained. "It is a practice that keeps me tethered to what is real rather than what I imagine should be real." "Can you teach me?" Taro asked. So Koji taught him, as Jiko-in had taught him. He taught him that gratitude was not about ignoring problems or pretending life was perfect. It was about developing the capacity to recognize what was present and valuable, even when things were difficult. "Some mornings," Koji told him, "I am grateful simply that I am not as miserable as I used to be. That is enough." You do not need to feel grand emotions. You just need to notice and acknowledge. Taro took up the practice with the enthusiasm of youth. But after a few weeks, he came to Koji frustrated. "It is not working," he complained. "I still feel anxious about money. I still compare myself to other fishermen. I still want what I do not have." Koji laughed, not unkindly. "And how long do you think it takes to undo years of habitual thinking? You have spent your whole life training your mind to focus on lack. Did you expect a few weeks of practice to completely reverse that? This is not magic. It is training. Be patient with yourself." "How long did it take you?" Taro asked. Koji thought about this. "I am not sure I can give you a specific time. It was gradual. I would have a good day where I felt present and content. Then several days where I felt like I had learned nothing. But over time, the good days became more frequent. My mind's habit of dissatisfaction grew weaker, though it never disappeared entirely. Even now, after all these years, I sometimes catch myself in old patterns. The difference is that now I notice more quickly, and I can choose to redirect my attention." "Choose," Taro repeated. "You make it sound so simple." "It is simple," Koji said. "But simple is not the same as easy. Every moment, you have a choice about where to place your attention. Will you focus on what is wrong, or will you acknowledge what is right? Will you rehearse your grievances, or will you recognize your gifts? The choice is always yours, but you have to remember that you have a choice." That is what the practice does. It reminds you over and over, until the reminder becomes unnecessary. As they fished together that day, Koji felt grateful for this opportunity to teach what he had learned. The practice that had transformed his own life was now being passed on, like a flame lighting another candle. He did not know if Taro would persist with it, if it would take root in his life the way it had in Koji's. But he had planted the seed, and that was enough. When Koji was an old man, his hair white as sea foam, his hands gnarled from decades of work, he still performed his morning and evening practice. Now his children were grown, some with children of their own. Yumi's health had declined, and she could no longer walk to the shore with him as she once had. His boat was smaller now, his catches more modest. By any external measure, he had less than he did in his middle years. And yet, he had never felt wealthier. One morning, Koji's grandson, a boy of 7 named Kai, asked to go fishing with him. As they prepared to leave, Kai noticed his grandfather standing still at the doorway. "Grandfather, why are you standing there? Are you feeling well?" "I am very well," Koji said. "I am just taking a moment to be grateful." "Grateful for what?" "For you," Koji said, taking the boy's hand. "For this day. For these old bones that still work well enough to take me out on the water. Would you like to try it with me? Think of 3 things you are grateful for." Kai scrunched up his face in concentration. "I am grateful for going fishing with you. I am grateful for the rice cakes grandmother packed for us. I am grateful that mother let me come instead of doing my lessons." Koji laughed, delighted. "Those are 3 excellent things. Now, we will do this again when we return this evening, and if you like, you can do it every day. It is a practice that will serve you well throughout your life." "What will it do?" Kai asked. Koji thought about how to explain to a 7-year-old what had taken him a lifetime to understand. "It will help you see your life clearly," he finally said. "Most people walk through their lives half asleep, always thinking about the next thing, never really present for this thing. This practice wakes you up. It helps you notice the gifts that are already here." "Am I asleep now?" Kai asked, confused. "No, right now, you are very awake. Children are naturally good at being present. It is we adults who forget. I am teaching you now so that when you grow up and the world starts to pull your attention in many directions, you will have this practice to bring you back." They went out on the water, and Koji taught his grandson how to cast a net, how to read the currents, how to be patient and attentive. But more than these practical skills, he taught him through his presence what it meant to be fully engaged with the moment. When Kai caught his first fish, Koji celebrated with him. When the boy got tangled in the net and became frustrated, Koji showed him how to pause, breathe, and approach the problem with patience rather than anger. When the sun grew hot and Kai complained about being thirsty, Koji taught him to first acknowledge what was good: the beautiful day, the gentle waves, the time together, before addressing what was uncomfortable. By the time they returned to shore in the late afternoon, Kai had learned more than just fishing. He had absorbed something deeper, though he could not yet name it. At the doorway, Koji reminded him of the evening practice. 3 things, he said. Kai thought for a moment. I am grateful I did not fall out of the boat. I am grateful for the fish we caught. I am grateful that you are my grandfather. Koji felt his eyes fill with tears. His voice thick with emotion, he said, and I am grateful that I lived long enough to fish with you, to teach you what was taught to me. This practice has been the greatest gift of my life, and now I give it to you. That night, after Kai had gone home and Yumi was sleeping, Koji sat alone, looking out at the moonlit sea. He thought about the young man he had been, so consumed with dissatisfaction, so blind to the wealth he possessed. He thought about the moment the ocean had nearly claimed him, how terror had cracked him open to gratitude. He thought about all the mornings and evenings of practice, the slow rewiring of his habitual mind. He thought about teaching Taro and now Kai, passing on what he had learned. His life had not been extraordinary by conventional standards. He had not become rich or famous. He had not achieved great feats or left monuments behind. He had simply learned to be awake to his own existence, to recognize the grace threaded through even ordinary moments, and to meet each day with acknowledgement rather than complaint. And that, he understood, was everything. Before sleeping, Koji performed his gratitude practice one more time. I am grateful for this long life, exactly as it was. I am grateful for every person who taught me, everyone I taught, every moment of joy and sorrow that shaped me. I am grateful that even now, as an old man, I can still feel wonder at the simple fact of being alive. These were his last conscious thoughts before sleep found him, and they would be among his first thoughts upon waking. Between those 2 moments of acknowledgement, his life unfolded, precious and temporary and complete. In the mountains, where ancient cedars stood like silent witnesses to the passage of centuries, there was a small temple devoted to the practice of gratitude. It had been founded many generations ago by a monk who believed that thankfulness was not merely a pleasant emotion, but a profound spiritual practice, a way of seeing that could transform suffering into wisdom. The temple was known as Kansha-ji, which means Temple of Appreciation, and it attracted seekers from across the land. Among those who came to Kansha-ji was a young woman named Hana. She arrived on a grey autumn day, her shoulders bent under the weight of a grief so heavy she could barely walk. Her husband and infant daughter had died the previous winter from fever, and Hana had not recovered. Food tasted like ashes in her mouth. Sleep brought only nightmares. The world had lost all colour, all meaning. She came to the temple not because she believed anything could help, but because she no longer knew what else to do. The abbess of Kansha-ji, an elderly woman named Ryanen, greeted Hana at the gate. She took one look at the young woman's hollow eyes and said nothing about gratitude or practice. She simply led Hana to a small room, brought her soup and tea, and let her rest. For 3 days, Ryanen made no demands. She allowed Hana to sleep, to cry, to sit in silence. She did not try to teach or fix or change anything. On the 4th day, Ryanen invited Hana to walk with her in the temple gardens. They moved slowly among the late-blooming chrysanthemums and the trees beginning to turn gold and crimson. Finally, Ryanen spoke. You have lost everything that mattered most to you. It was a statement, not a question, and Hana felt relief that this woman was not going to pretend otherwise. Yes, she said, I have nothing left. I am empty. Emptiness can be a terrible thing, Ryanen said gently, but it can also be a doorway. When we are stripped of everything, We have the opportunity to discover what cannot be taken from us. But you are not ready for that yet. First, you must honor your grief. There is no rushing this process. Hana looked at the abbess with something like hope. How long will it take? When will I stop feeling this way? I cannot tell you that. Grief has its own time. But I can tell you that while you are here, you are safe to feel whatever you feel. And when you are ready, not before, but when you are ready, I will teach you a practice that may help you live alongside your grief rather than being destroyed by it. Days turned into weeks. Hana worked alongside the other residents of the temple, performing simple tasks that required no thought. She swept floors. She helped in the kitchen. She tended the garden. The routine was soothing, creating structure when her inner world was chaos. Slowly, very slowly, some small part of her began to return to the present moment. She noticed the warmth of sunlight through a window, the taste of ginger tea, the sound of rain on the roof. One evening, as winter's first snow began to fall, Rhiannon came to Hana's room. "I think perhaps you are ready now," she said. "Would you like to learn the practice of this temple?" Hana felt resistance rise in her chest. How could she practice gratitude when her husband and child were gone? It felt like a betrayal, like she would be saying their loss did not matter. But she also trusted Rhiannon, who had been so patient with her. "I do not know if I can do this," she said, "but I am willing to try." Rhiannon smiled. "That is all I ask. The practice is very simple. Each day you will write down 3 things you are grateful for. They can be very small things. They can even be difficult things. If you can find a seed of something to acknowledge within them, you will do this every day, no matter how you feel, no matter how resistant your mind is. Can you do this?" "What if I cannot find 3 things?" Hana asked. "What if everything feels dead and meaningless?" "Then you write that you are grateful you are still breathing. You are grateful you have shelter from the cold. You are grateful that you were loved, even though that love is now the source of your greatest pain. There is always something, even if it feels small and insufficient." So Hana began the practice. The first night, she sat with her brush and paper for nearly an hour, her mind completely blank. Finally, mechanically, she wrote, "I am grateful for this room. I am grateful for the meal I was given. I am grateful that Abbess Rhiannon does not demand more of me than I can give." The words felt hollow, but she had written them, and that was something. The second night was no easier. Her hand trembled as she wrote, "I am grateful I survived this day. I am grateful for the memory of my daughter's face. I am grateful that grief means I loved deeply." That second one caught in her throat. Was she really grateful for the memory of her daughter's face, when that memory was also a knife that twisted in her heart every time it arose? But as she sat with the words she had written, something subtle shifted. Yes, the memory hurt. But the memory also meant that her daughter had existed, had been real, had been hers for a brief, precious time. If she had to choose between never having known her daughter at all, or having known her and lost her, which would she choose? The question was unbearable, but the answer was clear. Night after night, Hana continued the practice. Some nights the words came easier than others. She was grateful for the kindness of the other temple residents. She was grateful for the beauty of fresh snow. She was grateful for dreamless sleep. Other nights she struggled, could barely drag 3 sentences onto the page. She was grateful she had not given up entirely on living. She was grateful her hands still worked, her eyes still saw, her heart still beat, even though she was not sure she wanted these things. Weeks passed. Winter deepened. And something began to happen that Hana had not expected. The practice was not making her grief disappear. If anything, it was bringing her more fully into contact with the reality of her loss. But it was also creating small moments of respite, little islands of acknowledgement within the ocean of her pain. She began to notice things she had been blind to in her sorrow. The way another resident, a young monk named Kenzo, always made sure to set aside extra rice for her because she was so thin. The particular quality of morning light on snow, the deep peace of the meditation hall in the hour before dawn. One day in early spring, Hannah found herself helping in the temple garden, preparing the soil for planting. As she worked, her hands in the cold earth, she suddenly became aware of something. She was not thinking about her loss. For this moment, she was simply present, feeling the texture of soil, smelling the scent of thawing ground, hearing the sound of water running from the snowmelt. It lasted only a few moments before her mind returned to its familiar grief, but those few moments were significant. They showed her that it was possible to experience something other than pain, that her identity was not permanently fused with her suffering. That evening, she wrote in her gratitude journal, "I am grateful that today I felt something other than grief, if only for a moment. I am grateful that I can still experience beauty. I am grateful that healing, however slow and partial, is possible." She showed the entry to Ryonan, who read it carefully. "This is an important moment," the abbess said. "You have discovered that you are not your grief. Your grief is something you experience, something that moves through you, but it is not the totality of who you are. There is something in you that observes the grief, that can acknowledge other experiences alongside the grief. This observing awareness is always present, always untouched by what it observes." Hannah did not fully understand what Ryonan meant, but she felt the truth of it somewhere deeper than intellectual comprehension. Over the following months, as winter gave way to spring and then summer, she continued her practice. The entries in her journal slowly changed in character. At first, they had been heavy with pain. Gratitude dragged reluctantly from the depths of suffering. But gradually they became more varied, more alive. She was grateful for the laughter of children playing near the temple gate, a sound that once would have destroyed her, but now brought a bittersweet mixture of pain and joy. She was grateful for the strength returning to her body. She was grateful for dreams in which her daughter appeared, no longer nightmares, but visitations that left her sad, but also strangely comforted. One summer evening, as she and Ryonan walked through the gardens, Hannah asked, "Why does this practice work? How can simply writing down things I am grateful for change how I experience life?" Ryonan considered the question. "The mind is like water. It takes the shape of whatever contains it. For a long time, your mind has been contained by the vessel of loss and grief. That is natural and necessary. Grief must be honored, not bypassed. But if the mind remains in that shape too long, it begins to believe that shape is all there is. The gratitude practice creates a different container. It invites your mind to notice what else is present besides grief. Not instead of grief, but alongside it." She paused to pick a wildflower, twirling it between her fingers. "You are learning that you can hold multiple truths simultaneously. You can be heartbroken and still notice beauty. You can be devastated by loss and still feel grateful for what remains. This is the great paradox of being human. We are vast enough to contain contradictions. The practice teaches us to access that vastness." Hannah thought about this. "But sometimes I feel guilty when I feel grateful. Like I am betraying my husband and daughter by moving on, by allowing myself to experience anything positive." "Ah," Ryonan said, "this is a common trap. Tell me, if your husband and daughter could speak to you now, what would they want for you? Would they want you to remain frozen in grief forever? Or would they want you to live fully? To honor their memory by embracing the life you still have?" Tears came to Hannah's eyes. "They would want me to live." "Yes, and living does not mean forgetting. It means carrying them with you as you continue your journey. Your gratitude practice is not erasing them from your heart. It is making space in your heart for them and for everything else, for sorrow and joy, for memory and new experience, for loss and discovery. Your heart is big enough for all of it." As the months and years passed, Hana remained at the temple. She took vows and became a nun herself, devoting her life to helping others who came to Kanshaji, carrying their own burdens of grief and loss. She became known for her deep compassion, her ability to sit with others' pain without trying to fix it, and her unwavering commitment to the gratitude practice that had saved her life. She began teaching the practice to others, always with the same gentleness that Ryanan had shown her. When people resisted, saying their problems were too great for such a simple practice, she understood. When they said they felt guilty about finding gratitude in the midst of tragedy, she knew that struggle intimately. And when they had breakthroughs, when their faces suddenly lit up with the recognition that they could experience more than just their pain, she celebrated with them, remembering her own moment of awakening in the garden with her hands in the soil. One woman who came to the temple had lost her son to violence. She was consumed with rage and hatred for those responsible. Hana sat with her rage, acknowledging its validity, its fierce protective love for the son who was gone. But after some time, she introduced the gratitude practice. "I am not asking you to forgive," Hana told her. "I am not asking you to let go of your anger before you are ready. I am only asking you to notice what else is present in your life besides anger. Can you do that?" Reluctantly, the woman agreed to try. Her first entries were brutally honest. "I am grateful I am still angry, because it means I still love him. I am grateful I have not hurt anyone in my rage. I am grateful that this temple exists as a place to bring my unbearable feelings." Slowly, over many months, other things began to appear in her gratitude journal. She was grateful for the friends who had not abandoned her in her anger. She was grateful for the other parents she had met who understood her loss. She was grateful for brief moments when memories of her son brought smiles rather than only tears. Her anger did not disappear. It probably never would completely, but it stopped consuming her entirely. She learned to carry it as one part of her experience rather than the whole of her identity. Hana watched this transformation with deep recognition. She had walked this same path, learned these same lessons. And while she would never say she was grateful that her husband and daughter had died, some things were simply terrible, and no amount of spiritual practice made them okay. She could say she was grateful for what she had learned through the fire of that loss. She had learned the depth of her own resilience. She had learned that the human heart could break and continue beating, could shatter and still somehow hold love. She had learned that meaning could be found even in the midst of meaninglessness, not because suffering had some grand purpose, but because human beings had the capacity to create meaning through how they responded to suffering. On the anniversary of her daughter's death, Hana performed a special ritual. She wrote a letter to her daughter, telling her everything she was grateful for. Grateful for the brief time they had together. Grateful for what she had learned about love through becoming a mother. Grateful that her daughter's death had eventually led her to this temple, where she had found her life's purpose in helping others. Grateful that her daughter continued to shape her life even in absence. She burned the letter, watching the smoke rise into the sky, carrying her words to wherever her daughter might be. That evening, in her gratitude journal, she wrote, "I am grateful that love does not end with death. I am grateful that I can still feel my daughter's presence in my life. I am grateful that suffering broke me open in a way that allowed me to help others. I am grateful for this path I never would have chosen, but that has become my path nonetheless." 20 years after she first arrived at the temple, Hana was now the abbess. Ryanan had died peacefully in her sleep several years earlier, and Hana had inherited the responsibility of guiding the temple and teaching its practice. She was an old woman now, her black hair gone grey, her face lined with the marks of both sorrow and joy. She had helped hundreds of people through the gratitude practice, had witnessed countless transformations, had held space for more grief than most people experienced in a lifetime. One day, a man came to the temple who reminded Hana of herself when she first arrived. He was hollowed out by loss, barely alive, going through the motions of existence without any real engagement with life. His story was different. He had lost his entire family in a fire, but the quality of his devastation was familiar. Hannah greeted him at the gate, seeing herself in his empty eyes. She led him to a room, brought him tea, asked nothing of him. For days, she let him simply be, making no demands. And when the time was right, when she sensed some small readiness in him, she introduced the practice. "I am going to teach you something that will not fix anything," she told him. "It will not bring your family back. It will not make the pain go away. But it may, over time, help you learn to live alongside your pain rather than being destroyed by it. Are you willing to try?" The man looked at her with haunted eyes. "Why?" he asked. "Why should I try? What is the point of living when everything I loved is gone?" Hannah met his gaze steadily. "I asked the same question once. I did not have a good answer then, and I do not have a perfect answer now. But I can tell you this. Something in you brought you here. Something in you, however small, still wants to live. I am offering you a practice to nurture that small part, to help it grow strong enough to carry you through this darkness. The rest is up to you." For a long moment, the man said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. It was enough. Hannah gave him a journal and a brush. She explained the practice, knowing her words would seem inadequate to the enormity of his suffering, but offering them anyway. That night, the man sat with the blank page for hours, unable to write anything. But the next night, he managed 3 words. "I am breathing." It was not gratitude yet, just acknowledgement, but it was a beginning. Hannah had learned that this was how the practice worked. It started with tiny seeds of acknowledgement, so small they seemed meaningless. But over time, tended with patience and consistency, those seeds grew into something that could sustain life. Not happiness necessarily, not the absence of pain, but the capacity to be present for the full catastrophe of human existence without being annihilated by it. As Hannah watched this man begin his journey, she felt grateful for her own journey, for the practice that had saved her, for the opportunity to now help save others. Her life had not turned out as she expected or wanted. She had lost what she most loved. But she had found something else, something she never would have discovered without that loss. She had found her purpose. She had found a way to transform her own suffering into medicine for others' suffering. And while she would still trade it all to have her husband and daughter back, while that grief never completely left her, she could honestly say her life had meaning and value. The gratitude practice had taught her this, night after night, year after year, one small acknowledgement at a time. In a busy city, where the noise of traffic and commerce never seemed to cease, there lived a doctor named Akiko who had forgotten how to rest. She worked 14-hour days at the hospital, came home to eat standing up over the sink, then collapsed into bed only to wake a few hours later and do it all again. Her colleagues admired her dedication. Her patients appreciated her skill. But Akiko herself had become a stranger to her own life. She no longer noticed the cherry blossoms that bloomed each spring outside her apartment window. She could not remember the last time she had called her sister or seen her aging parents. She ate without tasting, walked without seeing, existed without truly living. Her life had become a series of tasks to be completed, problems to be solved, crises to be managed. She had no idea she was suffering because she had no point of comparison. This was simply how life was. Then one day, Akiko made a small mistake. She prescribed the wrong dosage of medication to a patient. Fortunately, a nurse caught the error before any harm was done. But Akiko was shaken to her core. She never made mistakes. Her entire identity was built on being competent, reliable, beyond reproach. The incident forced her to confront a truth she had been avoiding. She was exhausted. Not just physically tired, but depleted at a level so deep, she had forgotten what it felt like to be otherwise. The hospital administrator, noting Akiko's distress, mandated that she take a week off. "You have not taken a vacation in 3 years," he told her. "You are burning out, and that serves no one. Take the time. Rest. Come back restored." Akiko wanted to argue, but she was too tired even for that. She went home and, for the first time in years, had empty days stretching before her with nothing scheduled. She had no idea what to do with herself. The first day, she slept 12 hours. The second day, she wandered around her apartment, noticing for the first time how bare it was, how little of her personality was reflected in the space. It was more like a hotel room than a home. The third day, feeling restless and purposeless, she left the apartment and walked aimlessly through the city. She ended up in a part of town she had never explored, in front of a small bookshop with a hand-painted sign. On impulse, she went inside. The shop was quiet and peaceful, smelling of paper and incense. An elderly shopkeeper greeted her warmly and asked if she was looking for anything in particular. Akiko admitted she did not know what she was looking for. The shopkeeper studied her for a moment, then pulled a small journal from a shelf. "Perhaps this," she said. "I have found that people who do not know what they are looking for often need a place to discover what they are carrying." Akiko bought the journal, though she had no clear plan for using it. That evening, she sat at her bare kitchen table, the journal open before her. On a whim, she wrote at the top of the first page, "What am I grateful for?" She intended to make a list, a quick exercise before bed. But when she tried to think of things to write, her mind went blank. What was she grateful for? Her job. She felt only exhaustion when she thought of the hospital. Her apartment. It was just a place to sleep. Her life. She looked at her days and saw only obligation and depletion. The blankness frightened her. She was 42 years old, a successful doctor, living in a beautiful city. She should be able to think of countless things to be grateful for, but she could not access that feeling. It was as if the capacity for gratitude had atrophied from disuse, like a muscle that had not been exercised in years. Still, she felt compelled to write something. Finally, she wrote, "I am grateful the patient was not harmed by my mistake." It was a small thing, perhaps, but it was true. That error, which had caused her such distress, could have hurt someone, but it had not. That was something to acknowledge. She wrote 2 more things, mechanically. "I am grateful for this week of rest. I am grateful this journal found me." She closed the book, uncertain whether she would open it again, but the next evening she found herself returning to the journal. This time she wrote, "I am grateful for the sunlight that came through my window this morning. I am grateful that my body allowed me to sleep as long as I needed. I am grateful for the silence of my apartment." These were small observations, barely qualifying as gratitude, but they were honest. Each evening for the rest of her week off, Akiko continued the practice. She wrote 3 things each night, never more, never less. She did not analyze or judge what she wrote. She simply wrote and closed the book. On her first day back at work, she nearly forgot the practice entirely. She was swept back into the familiar current of demands and crises. But that evening, sitting in her apartment still wearing her scrubs, she remembered. She almost decided to skip it. She was so tired. But something made her take out the journal. "I am grateful I remembered this practice. I am grateful I helped 3 patients today. I am grateful I did not make another mistake." She felt a small sense of accomplishment as she closed the journal. It was such a minor thing, spending 2 minutes writing 3 sentences. But it was something she was doing for herself, a small island of intentionality in an ocean of reactive living. Weeks passed. The practice became a habit, something she did automatically before bed. She did not notice any dramatic changes in her life. She was still working long hours, still stressed, still exhausted, but subtle shifts were occurring beneath her awareness. She began to notice small pleasures during her day. The taste of her morning coffee, a moment of connection with a patient, the competence of a young resident she was training. These moments had always been present, but she had never paused to acknowledge them. Now, perhaps because she knew she would be writing in her journal that evening, she found herself paying more attention. One day, about 2 months into the practice, Akiko was walking through the hospital when she passed a window and saw cherry blossoms in full bloom. She stopped, startled. She had forgotten it was spring. When had the cherry trees bloomed? They must have been beautiful for days, and she had walked past them without noticing. She felt a pang of loss for all the beauty she had been blind to, all the moments she had missed because she was too busy, too preoccupied, too absent from her own life. That evening she wrote, "I am grateful I noticed the cherry blossoms today. I am grateful for the reminder that beauty exists even when I am not paying attention. I am grateful for this wake-up call." Something shifted in her as she wrote those words. She realized the gratitude practice was not just about feeling thankful. It was about training her attention to notice what was actually present in her life, rather than sleepwalking through her days. She had been living as if she would have infinite time to notice cherry blossoms, infinite time to call her sister, infinite time to truly inhabit her life. But she would not. Time was finite and precious, and she was wasting it. The next day, Akiko did something unusual. She took her lunch break outside instead of eating at her desk. She sat under the cherry trees, eating slowly, tasting her food, watching the petals drift down like snow. Other hospital staff walked by quickly, heads down, focused on wherever they were going. She had been one of them, always rushing to the next thing, never present for this thing. When she returned to work, she felt different. Not relaxed exactly, but more grounded, more connected to herself. That evening she wrote, "I am grateful I gave myself permission to sit under the cherry trees. I am grateful for the taste of my lunch, which I actually tasted for once. I am grateful that it is not too late to change how I live." Over the following months, Akiko made small but significant changes to her life. She started taking a real lunch break most days. She called her sister once a week. She visited her parents one Sunday a month. She decorated her apartment with things that brought her joy: plants, art, comfortable cushions. She reduced her work hours from 14 per day to 10, which was still substantial but felt more sustainable. Her colleagues noticed the changes. "You seem different," one said. "More present. What happened?" Akiko thought about how to explain. "I started paying attention," she said. "I started noticing what is actually here in my life, instead of always thinking about the next thing I need to do. It turns out there is more here than I realized." She told them about her gratitude practice, expecting them to dismiss it as too simple or too new age. But instead, several colleagues expressed interest. One, a nurse named Yuki, who was clearly heading toward her own burnout, asked if Akiko would teach her. So Akiko shared what she had learned, which was not much in terms of technique, but was profound in terms of impact. You just write 3 things you are grateful for each evening before bed. They can be small. They can feel insignificant. The point is not to feel some huge emotion of gratitude. The point is to train your attention to notice what is present, instead of only what is absent or wrong or insufficient. Yuki started the practice, and over time, Akiko watched her transform in ways that mirrored her own transformation. The exhaustion did not disappear. Their work was genuinely demanding, but the quality of their relationship to that exhaustion changed. Instead of feeling like victims of their circumstances, they felt more like people making choices. They could not control the demands of their work, but they could control where they placed their attention and what they chose to acknowledge. Word spread, and soon a small group of hospital staff were meeting once a month to share their gratitude practices. It was not a formal program, just a group of people who had discovered something valuable and wanted to support each other in maintaining it. They called themselves the Gratitude Circle, and their meetings were refreshingly simple. They would sit together in a quiet room, share tea, and each person would share something from their gratitude practice that week. No one tried to fix anyone's problems or give advice. They simply listened and witnessed each other's efforts to live more consciously. Akiko found these gatherings deeply nourishing. Hearing others' gratitude entries helped her see her own life from new angles. When Yuki shared gratitude for a patient who had thanked her, it reminded Akiko to notice the many times patients expressed appreciation. When another member shared gratitude for the challenge of a difficult case, it reframed Akiko's experience of struggle from something to avoid to something that brought out her best qualities. When an elderly doctor near retirement shared gratitude for still having steady hands and a sharp mind, it reminded Akiko not to take her own health and abilities for granted. One evening at the gratitude circle, a new member, a young resident named Daiki, shared his struggle with the practice. I try to find 3 things each night, but it feels forced and fake. I do not feel grateful. I am just going through the motions. Is that enough? Akiko, who had felt this way many times, responded gently. Yes, that is enough. You are training a new habit of attention. At first it will feel mechanical, and that is fine. You are teaching your mind to look in a different direction. Over time, the looking becomes more natural, and occasionally you will have moments where you feel genuine gratitude. But even when you do not feel it, the practice of looking is valuable. You are still rewiring your habitual patterns of attention. Daiki seemed reassured. Over the following months, Akiko watched him persist with the practice, and gradually his reports changed. He began sharing moments of genuine appreciation rather than just dutiful acknowledgement. His face, which had been tight with stress when he first joined the circle, became more open and peaceful. Years passed. The gratitude circle continued, with members coming and going as people moved or changed jobs, but the core practice remained. Akiko continued her nightly ritual of writing 3 things, and it continued to shape her life in profound ways. She was still a doctor, still worked hard, still faced the stress and demands of a medical career, but she was no longer absent from her own existence. She tasted her food, noticed cherry blossoms, called her sister, made time for beauty and connection. She had learned that gratitude was not about her circumstances being perfect. It was about her being fully present for whatever circumstances she found herself in. On the 10th anniversary of starting her practice, Akiko pulled out her first gratitude journal and read through the early entries. She could see her own evolution on the pages. The early entries were sparse, mechanical, the writing of someone going through the motions. But over time, the entries became richer, more varied, more alive. She could track her slowly awakening to her own life. The journals, she now had 10 of them, 1 for each year, were a record of her transformation from sleepwalker to someone fully awake. She realized that the practice had given her something more valuable than happiness or peace or any specific feeling. It had given her presence. It had taught her to show up for her own life, to be a participant rather than a spectator, to engage rather than merely endure. This, she understood, was the greatest gift she could have received. That evening, she wrote in her current journal, "I am grateful for the mistake I made 10 years ago that forced me to stop and examine my life. I am grateful for the small bookshop and the shopkeeper who gave me my first journal. I am grateful for these 10 years of practice, for every night I showed up for myself, even when I did not feel like it, for the slow accumulation of attention that has transformed my life." She closed the journal and looked around her apartment, now filled with plants and books and art, now clearly the home of someone who lived rather than merely existed. Through her window, she could see the city lights, and somewhere beyond them, cherry trees preparing for next spring's bloom. She would notice them this year, as she had every year since that day she woke up to their presence. She would notice and she would be grateful, and that noticing and gratitude would continue to shape her life in ways both subtle and profound. This was the practice. This was enough. In a village by the river, there lived a potter named Izamu, who could not stop comparing himself to others. He would visit the market and see other potters work, their bowls more perfectly round, their glazes more striking, their prices higher than his own, he would return to his studio deflated, his own work suddenly seeming crude and worthless. No matter how skilled he became, no matter how many pieces he sold, it was never enough. There was always someone more talented, more successful, more praised. Isamu's wife, Sumire, grew tired of his constant dissatisfaction. "You have a gift," she would tell him. "Your work is beautiful. Our children are fed and clothed because of your skill. Why can you not see what you have?" But Isamu could not hear her. His mind was always elsewhere, cataloguing other people's advantages and his own deficiencies. One spring, a traveling monk stopped in the village and asked if he could stay in Isamu's studio for a few nights in exchange for helping with chores. The monk, whose name was Bankei, radiated a quality of contentment that Isamu found both attractive and irritating. How could this man, who owned nothing but the clothes on his back, seem so at peace, while Isamu, who had a successful business and a loving family, felt constantly agitated? One evening, as they sat together after the day's work, Isamu asked Bankei directly, "How do you do it? How do you have nothing and yet seem happy, while I have so much and feel miserable?" Bankei smiled. "I do not have nothing. I have everything I need in this moment. You have much, but you are always thinking about what you do not have, what others have that you lack. Tell me, when you are thinking about the potter whose bowls are rounder than yours, are you present in your own studio, working on your own bowls?" Isamu had to admit he was not. "And when you are worrying about another potter's higher prices, are you present with your wife and children?" Again, no. "So you see," Bankei continued, "you are not actually living your life. You are living an imaginary life in which you are someone else or have something else. The real life, the one that is actually here, goes unlived while you dream of being elsewhere." The words struck Isamu like a blow. He realized Bankei was right. He had not truly looked at his own work, really looked at it, in months. He had not been fully present with his children in longer than he could remember. He was always half absent, his mind in some other studio, some other life. "How do I stop?" he asked. "How do I become present in my own life?" Bankei taught him a practice. Each evening, before you sleep, acknowledge 3 things about your day. Not grand things, not accomplishments. Simply notice and acknowledge 3 things that were present. The clay in your hands, the sound of your children's voices, the taste of your evening meal. Train your mind to notice what is actually in your life instead of what is absent from it. Isamu agreed to try, though he was skeptical. It seemed too simple to address his deep dissatisfaction. But that night, he sat quietly and brought to mind 3 things. The smoothness of the clay as he worked it on the wheel, the sunlight slanting through his studio window in the afternoon, the way Sumire had touched his shoulder as she passed by during the day. Small things, ordinary things. But as he acknowledged them, something in his chest softened slightly. For the next several weeks, Isamu maintained the practice. Bankei had moved on, but Isamu continued each evening to acknowledge 3 things. At first it was mechanical, a duty he performed without much feeling, but gradually he noticed that during the day he would think, "I will remember this for my evening practice," and in that thought he would actually be present for whatever this was. He would feel the clay more fully, knowing he would acknowledge it later. He would listen more carefully to his children, knowing he would recall their voices before sleep. One day, another potter came to the village, a man whose work was clearly superior to Isamu's. In the past, this would have sent Isamu into a spiral of self-doubt and envy. But on this day, something different happened. Isamu looked at the man's beautiful pieces and felt appreciation for the skill they represented. He felt curious about the techniques used. He felt inspired to try something new in his own work, but he did not feel diminished. The other potter's excellence did not erase Isamu's own value. There was space for both of them to be skilled, to create beauty, to make a living from their craft. That evening, Isamu wrote in his acknowledgement, "I am grateful I met a potter whose work is extraordinary. I am grateful that I could appreciate his skill without feeling destroyed by it. I am grateful for the inspiration to grow." He realized as he wrote this that something fundamental had shifted. He was not competing with the other potter. He was simply a person who worked with clay, doing his best, making his contribution. Whether his work was the best or the worst, the roundest or the most irregular, was less important than the fact that he was showing up, engaging with his craft, present in his own life. Years passed. Isamu's work did improve, not because he was striving to be better than others, but because he was more present with his materials, more attentive to the process. His pieces became sought after not because they were technically perfect, they often had small irregularities, but because they carried a quality of presence, of care, of aliveness. People could feel that these pieces had been made by someone who was fully engaged with the making. But more importantly than any external success, Isamu's inner life had transformed. He enjoyed his work now instead of using it as a yardstick to measure his worth against others. He was present with his family, truly listening to his children, appreciating his wife's steady love. He had learned that comparison was a form of absence, a way of leaving his own life to imagine other lives. And gratitude was a practice of presence, a way of staying rooted in the life he actually had. One day, a young potter who reminded Isamu of his former self came to study with him. The young man was talented but tormented, constantly comparing himself to others, never satisfied with his own work. Isamu recognized the suffering immediately. After watching the young man for a few days, Isamu sat down with him. "Let me teach you something more important than any technique. Let me teach you how to be present with your own work, your own life, instead of always looking elsewhere." He taught him the practice that Bankei had taught him years ago. Acknowledge 3 things each evening. Simple things. Present things. The young man was skeptical, just as Isamu had been, but he agreed to try. Isamu watched him struggle with the practice, watched him resist it, watched it slowly begin to change him. It was like watching his own transformation from the outside. He felt grateful that he could offer this teaching, that his own suffering could be turned into medicine for someone else's suffering. As Isamu grew older, his practice deepened. He began teaching it not just to potters, but to anyone who seemed caught in the trap of comparison and dissatisfaction. He became known in the region not primarily as a potter, but as a teacher of presence, of gratitude, of the art of being at home in one's own life. People would come to his studio ostensibly to commission a bowl or plate, but they would stay to learn how to transform their relationship with their own existence. Isamu would tell them about Bankei, the monk who had taught him. He would tell them about the years of practice, the slow accumulation of attention that had transformed everything. He would give them the practice and send them on their way, knowing that some would persist and others would not, but that the seed had been planted. On his deathbed, surrounded by his family, Isamu's last words were words of acknowledgement. "I am grateful for this life exactly as it was. I am grateful for the clay that shaped my hands. I am grateful for the love that shaped my heart. I am grateful for the practice that taught me to see." He died peacefully, a man who had learned to live fully in his own life rather than in comparison to others' lives. His bowls and plates, still used by families throughout the region, carried his legacy of presence. But his greater legacy was the practice he had shared, which continued to be passed from person to person, helping them wake up to the lives they actually had, instead of dreaming of lives they imagined elsewhere. In a monastery high in the mountains, where the air was thin and the silence was deep, there lived a monk named Eshun, who had achieved everything she had set out to achieve. She had studied with renowned masters. She had attained deep states of meditation. She was respected by her peers and sought after as a teacher. By all external measures, her spiritual life was a success, And yet, she felt empty. Something was missing, though she could not name what. She brought her struggle to the head monk, an ancient woman named Ekkyo, who rarely spoke, but whose presence radiated a quality Eshun longed for. "Master," Eshun said, "I have practiced diligently for 20 years. I have read the scriptures, mastered the forms, sat countless hours in meditation, and yet I feel I have missed something essential. What am I doing wrong?" Ekkyo looked at her for a long time before responding. "You have been so busy trying to achieve enlightenment that you have failed to notice you are already alive. You have been climbing the mountain of spiritual attainment, eyes fixed on the summit, but you have not noticed the wildflowers by the path, the birds in the trees, the taste of the mountain air. You have been so focused on becoming that you have forgotten to be." Aishin felt tears come to her eyes. It was true. She could not remember the last time she had really noticed anything. Her practice had become another form of striving, another way of always reaching for the next thing, instead of being present for this thing. "How do I remedy this?" she asked. Ekkyo gave her a practice. "Each evening, before you sleep, write down 3 things from your day. Not spiritual experiences, not signs of progress, simply 3 things you noticed: the way light fell on the temple floor, the taste of your tea, the sound of rain. Can you do this?" Eshun agreed, though part of her thought it seemed too mundane, too far removed from the lofty spiritual goals she had been pursuing. But she trusted Ekkyo, so she began. Each evening, she would write 3 observations from her day. At first, she struggled. She realized she had not truly noticed anything in her rush from one meditation session to the next, from one teaching to the next. But as she committed to the practice, she found herself paying more attention during the day. She would catch herself thinking, "I will write about this tonight." And in that thought, she would actually be present for the experience. Slowly, over weeks and months, Eshun's entire practice transformed. She still meditated, still studied, still taught. But the quality of her engagement changed. She was no longer trying to achieve some future state of enlightenment. She was present for the actual experience of sitting, of reading, of speaking with students. And in that presence, she found what she had been seeking. Not as some dramatic experience of awakening, but as a simple recognition that she had always been exactly where she needed to be, that the point of practice was not to become someone else, but to fully inhabit being who she already was. Years later, students would come to her asking about the secret to spiritual development. She would smile and tell them, "The secret is, there is no secret. You simply pay attention to your actual life instead of the life you imagine you should be living. You practice gratitude for what is present instead of striving for what is absent. You show up again and again for this moment and this moment and this moment. That is all. That is everything." In a modern apartment in the heart of a sprawling city, a software engineer named Kenta sat in front of his computer at 2 a.m, his eyes burning with exhaustion. He had been working for 16 hours straight, driven by a deadline that felt like life or death. His back ached, his head throbbed, his stomach was sour from too much coffee and too little food. And yet he could not stop. He had to finish this project, prove his worth, secure his position in the company. Only then, he told himself, could he rest. Only then could he relax. Only then would he be safe. But the deadline passed, and another appeared. The project was completed, and another began. Kenta's whole life had become a series of sprints from one deadline to the next, with no space in between for recovery or reflection. He lived for a future moment, when everything would finally be done, when he could finally breathe. But that moment never came. At 35, Kenta developed panic attacks. They came without warning. His heart would suddenly race, his breath would shorten, his vision would narrow. The first time it happened, He thought he was having a heart attack. The emergency room doctor found nothing physically wrong and suggested stress and anxiety were the culprits. "You need to slow down," the doctor told him. "Your body is trying to tell you something." But Kenta did not know how to slow down. His entire identity was built on productivity, on achievement, on constantly doing more. When he tried to rest, he felt guilty and anxious. His mind would immediately fill with all the things he should be doing. One evening, unable to sleep, Kenta found himself browsing online forums for people dealing with anxiety. Someone mentioned a practice that had helped them, writing 3 things they were grateful for each night. Kenta almost dismissed it as too simplistic, too new age, but he was desperate. Nothing else was working, so he decided to try. The first night, he opened a note on his phone and stared at the blank screen. What was he grateful for? His job, which was destroying his health? His apartment, where he barely spent any waking hours? His life, which felt like a treadmill he could not step off? After 10 minutes of staring, he finally typed, "I am grateful my heart is still beating. I am grateful I have a place to sleep. I am grateful I am trying something new." They were meager acknowledgements, barely qualifying as gratitude. But they were honest. He felt a tiny bit lighter after writing them, as if naming these small truths created space around the tightness in his chest. The next night, he wrote 3 more things, and the night after that. He did not feel any dramatic shift. His anxiety did not disappear. His work was still overwhelming, but something subtle was changing. During his days, he began to notice small moments that he would normally have rushed past. The way morning light came through his apartment window, the taste of his first sip of coffee, the satisfaction of solving a difficult coding problem. These moments had always been there, but he had been blind to them, always focused on the next thing, the next problem, the next deadline. After 2 weeks of the practice, Kenta had his first full night of sleep in months. He woke up surprised, almost confused by the experience of feeling rested. That evening he wrote, "I am grateful I slept. I am grateful my body is trying to heal. I am grateful for the possibility that things can be different." Over the following months, Kenta's practice continued. He began to make other changes in his life. He set boundaries around his work hours. He started taking walks during his lunch break. He reconnected with friends he had lost touch with. None of these changes came easily. His old patterns had deep roots, but the gratitude practice created a foundation that supported the changes. Each evening, by acknowledging 3 things, he reminded himself that his life included more than just work, that there was value in rest and connection and beauty. One day, Kenta's manager called him in for a performance review. Kenta braced himself, expecting criticism for his reduced hours. Instead, his manager said, "Your work has actually improved since you started setting boundaries. You seem more focused, more creative. Whatever you are doing, keep doing it." Kenta realized that his old pattern of constant overwork had not been making him more productive. It had been making him exhausted and scattered. By learning to acknowledge what was enough, by practicing gratitude for what was present rather than constantly striving for more, he had become not just healthier, but more effective. Years passed. Kenta continued his practice, filling digital notebooks with his nightly acknowledgements. He became an advocate for work-life balance at his company, helping to create policies that supported employee well-being. He trained new engineers not just in technical skills, but in the importance of sustainable work habits. He shared his gratitude practice with anyone who seemed to be heading down the path he had once been on. On the 10th anniversary of starting his practice, Kenta looked back through his notes. He could see his evolution clearly. The early entries were desperate, the writings of someone barely holding on, but over time, they became more varied, more alive, more genuinely appreciative. He had learned that gratitude was not about pretending everything was perfect. It was about training his attention to notice the fullness of his actual life instead of fixating on what was wrong or missing or not yet achieved. He had learned that enough was not a destination to reach, but a way of seeing. He could choose to experience his life as insufficient, always chasing more, or he could choose to notice what was already here, already enough. That evening he wrote, "I am grateful for the panic attack that forced me to change. I am grateful for 10 years of showing up for this practice, even when it felt mechanical. I am grateful that I learned to live in my life instead of constantly running from it." He closed his laptop and looked around his apartment, now filled with plants and art and books, now clearly the home of someone who lived rather than just survived. Through his window, the city lights spread out like stars fallen to earth. He felt present, grounded, at home in his own skin. This was the gift of gratitude, not happiness exactly, not the absence of difficulty, but the capacity to be fully alive to whatever life brought, to meet each moment with presence rather than resistance. This was enough. This was everything, was.